Bill 6215, and in the general principles chapter, if I may borrow the category used by the President Pro Tem. And with that, still on the floor is the Chairman of the Committee on Finance, Senator Loren Legarda. And to interpret on the general principles is the President Pro Tem, Senator Ralph Recto, Mr. President.
Senator Legarda is recognized, as well as Senator Ralph Recto.
So a minute suspension first, Mr. President, to
Session
have the
suspended
staff
for 1
ready.
There.
Ralph, okay tayo? Majority Leader? Okay. Ayos pa.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. Would the beautiful Chairman of the Committee on Finance yield to a few questions?
Yes, to the handsome Pro Temp, who will ask only one question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. One very long question, Mr. President. Just kidding. Mr. President, I recall last year I made recommendations, suggestions to increase the number of macroeconomic assumptions, parameters, and targets in our BESF. The importance of these macroeconomic indicators, parameters, these are the numbers used in making the budget. Is that correct, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President.
Now, having said that, Mr. President, I note that there are about 15 of these macroeconomic parameters. I suggested at least to include 4 more, Mr. President. Let's take a look at the macroeconomic parameters. You have the gross national income, real GNI growth, nominal gross domestic product. You have targets for your GDP, inflation rate, what the population will look like. Then you have the unemployment rate. And here you will notice that the unemployment rate is going down, Mr. President. Now, wouldn't it be wise to include the labor participation rate in our macroeconomic assumptions?
That's a very wise suggestion, Mr. President. In fact, that was the basis of how your Committee on Finance crafted and recrafted the budget. You will notice that the provision for the 1 billion shared services facilities was 1 billion and not the 200 million that was in the GAB. You would also, there was an intervention of Senator Zubiri in the DTI hearing. You would also see that the provision for taking care of the poorest of the poor in our DSWD centers, which was not in the NEP and the GAB, is now there for 2 billion pesos. You would also see many interventions to curb or to address the problem of youth unemployment from 15 to 25 years old, which is at a level of 21. There's a very high youth unemployment rate, Mr. President. In fact, I agree with you that the macroeconomic assumptions should include, how much is youth unemployment? 11. The highest is youth unemployment at 11% and many other issues. You're correct.
Yes.
The unemployment issue and underemployment and youth underemployment should be there.
Including
which are
women
contained.
participating in the labor force.
And those participating in the labor force, yes.
Now, as I mentioned, it doesn't make sense to have the unemployment rate going down if your labor participation rate is going down as well.
Yes,
So
Mr.
it's
President.
important to take a look at the labor participation rate. Maybe know what the labor participation rate is today.
What's the labor participation rate?
Ibig sabihin, those looking for
Yes.
jobs.
PSA. What's the labor participation rate? While they're looking for the exact number, Mr. President, allow me to put on the record the unemployment rate of 5.5%, and target in 2022 is 3.5%. The underemployment rate, baseline 2015 is 19.7, and target is 16 to 18% in 2022. Just 1 second for the labor participation rate.
Anyway, Mr. President, I do not
Here, I
intend
have it,
to
Mr. President.
belabor the point. Yes, but please
Labor
continue.
force participation rate fell to 61.4%,
And that is the point, Mr.
with
President.
significant decline in the labor force participation rate of female workers.
That is the point,
Common
Mr.
reasons for
President.
leaving the labor force were school participation, temporary illness or disability, and taking on household duties, including childcare.
Correct, Mr. President. And that's why I'm saying it is important to include the labor participation rate, because it might give us a false hope that the unemployment rate is dropping. Pero pala, there are less people looking for jobs. Posibleng nagsawa na maghanap
Yeah.
ng trabaho.
Yes, Mr. President, but you will see that one of the reasons why it fell is because they went back to school. Nakikita po natin, may epekto na yung ating 8.3 billion na linigay natin sa mula sa ARM budget sa free college education ngayong taong ito bago pa man maisabatas yung ating free tertiary
Yes,
education.
I agree, but nevertheless, Mr. President, it is also alarming to see that, especially considering that 50% of women should be in the labor force. I mean, 50%, 50-50, male and female dapat yan. Okay? But that statistic will show that there are more men working than women. And it is important to have all able-bodied to be employed and looking for work. And that's precisely the point why I think we should include the labor participation rate. But let me move on, Mr.
Yes.
President. I'm sure that the
We
chairman of
agree,
the
and
committee
that's
agrees.
noted.
Yes.
And our economic managers are listening, and that is included in the ambition natin and the PDP plan. It should be part of the macroeconomic assumptions.
Yes, thank you very much. Now, moving forward, the purpose of all this effort today and our budget exercise is really to reduce the poverty in the country. Isn't that correct?
Yes, of course, Mr. President. All these infrastructure spending, build, if it will just enrich the richest or the 2% of our country, what we need to address is the 21.9% of our population, Mr. President.
And I gladly note that the government's plan is to reduce poverty to 14% by 2022. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. President.
Now, shouldn't we put those statistics in the budget so that we can see every year,
Nandito.
bumababa ba yan, tumataas ba yan, flat ba yan?
Mr. President, it's actually in our poverty statistics, in our budget sensitivity. Is it not in the budget?
No, all I'm saying is that we should include that in page 1 of macroeconomic parameters.
Yes. This, Mr. President, these are done every 3 years. In fact, we are relying on the 2015 data, and 2015, it's 21.60, and the target, you're correct, is 13 to 15% by 2022.
That's correct.
You're correct, it should be on page 1.
Yes, thank you
because
very much.
if we do not lessen, and if the poverty level does not reduce or does not decline, then what we're doing is not correct.
Sure, correct. Thank you very much. Why not also include debt to GDP?
Kasama ang debt to GDP ratio.
It is not in the macroeconomic indicators, Mr. President.
It's included in my table, but probably it's debt to GDP ratio. In fact, Mr. President, the notes are not with me, but I know it's been declining because our
I
debt to
understand
GDP
that,
ratio
Mr.
is
President.
40%. But
I
you're saying
understand
it
that.
should be included on page
In the
1.
macroeconomic
In the macroeconomic.
indicators, targets, assumptions, so on.
I agree with you.
So that we know every year, will that be going down? Will that be going up? Will it be steady?
In fact, if my memory serves me right, when they're looking at the note, it's 40% is our debt to GDP.
That is
And
correct.
it's declining. And by 2022, I believe it will be 37% if we are to retain our growth rate.
Yes,
Tama?
that is correct. Okay, so let's include that in the macroeconomic indicators.
Yes, it should be included, Mr. President.
Now, in addition to that, why not also include foreign direct investments, assumptions, and targets?
Oh, that's true, Mr. President. In fact, in
So
our
we
budget
agree.
briefing
So
yesterday.
maybe next year we can include this already.
Yes. Do you want it on record, our
Yes.
FDI investments?
yes.
Give me the page on FDI.
That should be in the macroeconomic parameters and indicators so that we also know whether this is going up, going down, and that will have an effect also on our exchange rate, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. In fact, let me just state on record that net FDI flows has been exhibiting a generally upward trend since 2010. However, there's a slight decrease observed in 2015, followed by an increase in 2016. However, it must be noted that net FDI flows in the first semester of 2017 was lower by 14% compared to the same period in 2016.
That is
a
correct.
fact.
And that is precisely the point, Mr. President, and that could be a contributing factor to why our peso is at 51.
Yes, Mr. President.
Humihina yung foreign direct investment. Now, let me move on, Mr. President. I take note as well that we expect Dubai crude oil prices to increase in 2018 from between $45 to $60 a barrel. By 2019, $50 to $65 a barrel. By 2020, $50 to $65 a barrel. Is that correct?
Mr. President, the projection is 45 to 60 per barrel in 2018.
And then 50 to 65 from 2019 onward.
2019 onwards, Mr. President. The projection in 2019 is 50 to 65.
Right.
You're
And we
correct.
put this here. It is important that we have this here because oil is our biggest import.
Yes, Mr. President.
And we probably import, what, 100 billion barrels a year? A little more than that?
What's our importation? Oil.
Maybe about 120 by now, maybe, a little more. And that is an important number because it is part of your import of goods,
Yeah.
which next year will be about $93 billion. And in
import of
2019,
goods-
103 billion, and in 2020, about $115 billion. Is that correct?
The import of goods is 93.8 billion US dollars projection in 2018, Mr. President.
Precisely my point. So this is a factor in determining what your import level will be, right? Assuming for $50 a barrel, maging $100. At $50 a barrel, 100 million barrels, your import cost is $10 billion. Kung ang oil pumalo ng $100 a barrel, your import cost is $10 billion. That will have a factor in your exchange rate eventually.
Yes, Mr. President.
Now, moving forward, I note that your current account balance is declining. I note that the gross international reserves is declining. We note that oil prices will be increasing. And would this then, with these numbers, it would appear that the exchange rate, as I mentioned last year, will weaken.
The projection of the exchange rate is still 48 to 51, Mr. President, to the
But
US dollar.
today, it is already at 51.
51. That
In
is a
fact, the
projection.
market is saying that it could hit 53 next year. And maybe one of the reasons why the peso has been steady at 51 this year is because two investments came in. Yung 45 billion na galing sa Mighty, yung pagbili ng Mighty,
Mighty is 30 billion, Mr. President.
45 lahat yun. 30 billion yung binayaran sa gobyerno. And then you had 65 billion pesos in dollars from Macquarie, if I'm not mistaken. The two biggest that came in this year. And that's why it stopped the slide of the peso to a certain degree at 51. Okay? Now, having said that, with these numbers, you have a triple deficit. You have the national government deficit, you have a current account balance deficit. As you can see, imports will grow to 115 billion, exports at 58 billion by 2020. That gap is widening. And your gross international reserves is going down. Now, the point is this. What was the peso in 2016? What was the peso? 40, 45, 46?
It was 47.5, Mr. President.
In 1 year, from 47.5 to 51.50, more or less. What was it in 2015? 43?
45.50, Mr. President.
45.50. Malaking drop yan in the last 2 years. And expectedly, next year, it is possible that the peso will fall to 53. There's a great probability looking at the numbers. Now, having said that, Mr. President, if we are to pass the train at 3 pesos per liter next year, or 6 pesos per liter, what will the price of gasoline be?
What will the price of gasoline be
Yes.
if
Magkano ba ngayon ang gasolina?
there's a depreciation?
No, today, how much is the gasoline right now? The gasoline prices have been going up steadily because the peso has been depreciating. Isn't that correct? And inflation today is 3.4% as of this morning, if I'm not mistaken, tumataas na.
As of 9 a.m., it was 3.4%.
3.4% inflation.
3.4%, Mr. President.
Okay?
For the
If
month
the
of
peso
September.
further depreciates, you may breach that inflation target of 4%. Plus the fact that we're increasing prices next year, knowing that we will pass the train. But hopefully we can calibrate it in such a way that inflation doesn't go up too much. That is the point, Mr. President, that I'm trying to drive at. And that's why I was saying earlier, it's important to have the FDI assumptions in the macroeconomic indicators as well,
Mr. President, just to...
among others.
Yes. You mentioned about inflation. For September, it's 3.4%, but year-to-date from January, it's 3.1%. And our target is
Agreed.
2 to 4%.
Agreed. Now, you know, but that is the trend. You can see already a trend going up. There is a trend going up, Mr. President. Maliwanag yun. And as the peso further weakens, inflation will go up. That is the point, Mr. President. And especially the peso is weakening, oil prices increasing. That's a double whammy. That will translate to higher pump prices. Now, I do not intend to belabor the issue. I'm just putting that on record as part of our debates also later
But we
on.
must prepare for the possibility
precisely the
of the
point.
depreciation, further
Correct.
depreciation of the
And-
peso
and
against
as
the
I
dollar.
mentioned earlier, and I did mention this last year already, it was 45, 47, 51, next year potentially 53, 53, 50. I hope I'm wrong, Mr. President, but then you expect oil prices is already steadily increasing. Now, let me move forward. And of course, we know the threats to our BPO industry with artificial intelligence, among others. So we have to plan accordingly, Mr. President. Now, let me move forward. I do not intend to belabor. I promise the chairman I'll be very quick. Now, on the revenue side, I note as well that revenues next year will be 2,840 billion.
So, ng revenue.
Projection next year. The biggest growth rate will come from the Bureau of Customs, from 459 to 637. A slight increase with the BIR from 1,782 to 2 trillion 5 million. Now, I understand that the revenues from train are already incorporated in these numbers. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. President.
Which is roughly 140 billion?
134, Mr. President.
Yes, I'm just rounding it off, Mr. President. So roughly 140, 135 billion. Now, I also notice that we expect a deficit of 3% of GDP next year, meaning to say, in absolute terms, 523 billion pesos.
What is your question? I'm sorry.
Yes, the deficit next year is 3% of GDP,
Yes.
and in absolute monetary value, that's 523 billion pesos. Meaning to say, we will spend more than the revenue,
Yes.
government spending, assuming this is the program,
Yes.
and we're able to follow this program, this plan, we will spend 3.364 trillion. Our revenues are 2.840 trillion. May deficit tayo ng 523.6 billion.
523
0.6
will be
billion,
our
diba?
deficit. Yes.
Correct. That means we spent more than we earned by 523 billion. Now, having said that, if I take a look at the financing, the borrowing, gross borrowing, we are borrowing next year 888 billion pesos. Are these numbers correct, that the amortization next year is only 61.7, and our net financing is 826 billion?
Yes, our net financing, Mr. President, for 2018 is 821.274. Net domestic borrowings is 706.9. Net foreign is 114.2.
Yes. Total net financing is 826.6. Is that correct?
821.2.
I'm looking at page 2 of the BESF. Anyway, the point is this. And what is the amortization there? 61.7 billion? Ibig sabihin, yun lang ang babayaran natin na principal. You know, I'm looking at the budget submitted to us, the BESF. Okay. We're just on page 2.
262 is our domestic. Our domestic amortization, Mr. President, is 262 billion 99 for 2018.
Let me repeat my question. Our gross borrowing is 888.2. Less amortization of 61.7. Net financing is 826 billion. Maybe Yoli could give the chairman a copy of the BESF.
This is a
page
copy.
2.
Ito yung net financing, 821.
Eh, bakit iba? 1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
1 minute
Bakit iba yung sa LBM?
Session suspended.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Yes, sir. Thank you,
We're
Mr.
already
President.
on the same page, literally, Mr. President.
Yes, correct. Thank
And
you. Because I'm just surprised with these numbers, Mr. President. And my question is, tama ba itong mga numerong ito? Why is that, Mr. President? If you look at it, the deficit is just 523.6 billion, but we are borrowing 888 billion. Okay lang yan if we're paying down our principal. But the net financing is 826. Now, in 2016, actual, we only borrowed 330 billion.
in 2016, Mr. President, our gross borrowings was 507,
What is the net financing?
330.
That's the point. What was the deficit in 2016?
It was, what was the
353.
deficit in 2016?
It's there. It's on the same page. 353.
2.4% or 353.4.
Correct. And we borrowed 330. Malapit lang. Okay? Now, in 2017, the deficit is 482. We borrowed net 584 to build up a cash of 102. This year, we're borrowing 888 for a net financing of 826 divided by the GDP. GDP terms, that's 5% of GDP, roughly. If I add the 140 of trade, assuming di mapasa, but I'm hoping that it will be passed, that's 6%. Okay? And that's why I was asking also, in your macroeconomic assumptions, dapat nandito yung debt to GDP ratio para makita natin, is the debt, if we're going to be borrowing net 826 billion, and then in 2019, it says here, we will be borrowing 889 billion. In 2020, we will be borrowing net 955 billion. Parang ang lalaki ng mga borrowings natin. Now, and therefore, I wanted to ask also the question which Senator Lacson asked earlier about the financial position of government. And the Treasurer said earlier that it should be done in executive session. Right?
We
Could we
have
get a
the,
copy of the financial statements?
we have
of
the
NG?
information. The treasurer is still here.
Maybe the...
Yes. And we have the information. As I mentioned earlier, the information is ready. We just can't say it on the record, Mr.
No, I
President, for
understand.
reasons
I understand.
I
No
already
problem.
mentioned. But
Could
it can be
we have a
furnished.
copy?
It can be
Yes.
furnished this afternoon, even.
Yes. Thank you very much. I will no longer belabor the point, Madam Chair. I'm just concerned with these amounts of borrowing. Now, moving on, Mr. President. Just for my guidance and understanding, I note that the national government, as we mentioned earlier, will have a deficit in 2018 of 523 billion. But we are borrowing 826. Okay? Now, if you take a look at page 3, consolidated public sector financial position. Okay? The top figure is 510, national government deficit 523, CB restructuring 6.1 billion. Until today, we're still paying the debts of the central bank, the old central bank. Maybe could we have a, since we will be discussing next year the new Central Bank Act. Could we get a copy of how much have we paid already over the years since 1992? You see, Bibol,
How much we paid?
have we paid already for the central bank restructuring? Because every year, I note it's increasing again. It's 6.1 billion for 2018. Board of Liquidators, Central Bank Board of Liquidators.
The Board of Liquidators, how much we have paid from
From the beginning.
the beginning?
Could that just be furnished our office? Maybe
Yes.
the committee and our office, no? Now, let me move on. Then you have a
Do you have the
surplus,
information?
other public sector. Okay? SSS, GSIS, PhilHealth of 84 billion. There is a surplus. Bangko Sentral, 1 billion surplus. GFI, 14 billion surplus. But I take note, local government units, there is a surplus of 249 billion. Meaning to say, hindi magastos ng local government
Yes.
yung budget nila. How much is the IRA this year of the local government? More than 500 billion, if I'm not mistaken.
Except the total IRA for 2018 is 522,748,165.
Okay. And we expect that by the end of 2018, 249 billion hindi magagastos. Or they will have a surplus.
Yes, Mr. President.
Right? Okay. And therefore, the consolidated public sector deficit is just 1%, roughly. Kasi may surplus eh.
Yes, Mr. President.
Tama?
Yes.
Okay? Now, that assumes a deficit national government of 3%. If the
Yes.
deficit is actually 6, then your consolidated is -3. Okay? As we discussed earlier. But the point is also here, why is it that the LGUs will have such a big surplus? And this is going, the trajectory is upward. From 2015, 179, 2018 will be 249 billion. The trajectory is upward.
Because the era is increasing, Mr. President.
So why is it in the 2018 budget, there is an allocation additional from ERA of 50 billion allocation to local government units? Ng 50 billion kung hindi rin naman magagastos.
Mr. President, there are DILG projects that have matching grants with local governments, and that's the reason for the additional funds for LGUs.
I understand, Mr. President, but look at the record. 249 billion hindi magagastos.
I understand.
So there's a mismatch somewhere. That's the point. Maybe because also there are too much restrictions. Procurement laws, COA, DILG circulars, old DBM circulars that hamper the ability of LGUs to spend. Now, meron din na yung salary standardization for, right? We're, I think, on our second year. Next year will be the third and the fourth year. Hindi kasama ang LGU dun. Why not allow them na rin? Total naman, equal pay for equal work. Then magagastos sila to siguro. I mean, that's the point. Since, remember, I'm following up also on the underspending.
Yes.
As mentioned earlier by Senator Lacson. So it's not only the national government.
It's the local governments. In fact,
Also,
just
249 billion yun eh.
and just to propound the information that the concentration of surplus is in the first-class local governments. It said here it's 62% of surplus.
Of
is
the
in first-
249.
of the
Okay?
249.
Then all the more we know that we need to amend now the local government code.
They don't.
That the era sharing is already skewed. Di ba? Kailangan ng amendments.
Pero hingi pa rin sila ng hingi.
Now, let me move on para mabilis tayo. I don't want to take too much time, Mr. President. On the underspending.
Ang dami nilang pera, tapos
Yeah.
hingi ng hingi.
Now, there are structural issues, I suppose. So,
I agree
as
with you,
mentioned
Mr.
earlier.
President.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I'm sure that the chairman understands all of this. Now, let me just move forward. And not to belabor the point of Senator Lacson earlier, and I'm glad he brought it up, but I'd just like to present, may slide ba tayo? Ano?
I agree with you.
Okay.
There's actually so much resources.
Yes.
And
yes.
you are correct in citing that even the local governments have so much surplus.
And it doesn't make sense to me that
they
we're
line up here
transferring
asking
an
for additional
additional
funds.
50 billion that they're not asking. We are supplying it to
We're
them.
supplying them, and they come here and ask for more, Mr. President.
Correct. Okay, now, okay, let me move on, para mabilis na lang tayo. Let me first present to you, unfortunately, we don't have a slide right now, but this was presented earlier by Senator Lacson, but I'll give you just some details here. In 2016, this is according to COA, okay? Unutilized budget, total, was 607 billion. Unutilized. Unutilized of PS, 47, 48 billion. Okay? Unutilized MOE, 116 billion. Okay? Unutilized financial expenditure. Ibig sabihin, faulty rin ang DOF in determining how much we should pay on interest expenses. 90 billion. Capital outlay, 352 billion. Of course, this was the previous administration's budget, not of this administration, but 2016. Kalahati, this administration. So, 607 billion. Okay? just take note of these figures. No? For 2017, we made our calculations already based on the first 2 quarters of the year. 2017. Ito ba yun? Where's the 2017? Okay. This one? Unutilized. Ito? Hindi. Yung projection. Wala tayong PS. Okay. Okay. I don't have the figures now, but I can do it in the office. Nevertheless, what I have is this. The budget this year is including continuing appropriations, and that's why I support the position of Secretary Jokno, na next year gawin na natin 1-year validity ang budget. Okay? Para there's no confusion. It's so hard to manage a 2-year budget. Okay?
Mr. President, you answered your own question and you're very correct.
No, that's not a question.
No, but the
question
statement
is
on
this.
underspending,
Yes,
it's because of a 2-year cycle, which we're trying to correct
It's
through
not only that. It's not
budget
only
reform.
that. Oh, okay, just take a look at the numbers first. Huh? For 2017, the budget's actually 3.4, pero may continuing na 300 billion. Actually more, but 300 billion, 3.7. Okay? We expect 800 billion roughly this year na hindi magagastos. We can break that down to PS, MOE, capital outlay by department, so on and so forth, as I did earlier. No? I will not. In 2016, the biggest culprit was already presented by Senator Lacson earlier. DPWH, but not the fault of the Secretary today. That was the budget in 2016. The DPWH, the DepEd, the DOH, DOTR. I'm sure you know that in your budget deliberations,
Yes,
right?
Mr. President.
More or less, it is the same for 2017, although the DPWH will spend 98% of their budget kasi line item. Now, the reason for the underspending is, you're correct, the 2-year cycle, you don't have enough cash for the 2-year cycle in budgeting. Okay? The second is really poor planning,
That's true.
as you discussed already earlier.
Yes.
Like for DepEd and DOH, wala naman site development planning. And that's why Senator Villar mentioned, as a developer, sanay sila sa planning. Ang una mong gagawin, bibili ka ng lupa, ipaplano mo, lalagay ka ng bahay, inuna mo yung lupa.
Sa atin, nauuna yung pera, tapos maghahanap ng
O,
lupa.
parang katulad ng binanggit ko kagabi. Ang gobyerno, halimbawa, uutang sa bangko, kukuha ng contractor, kukuha ng architect, engineer, tapos magpapagawa ng bahay, saan pala yung lupa? So that's where the problem is, Mr. President, no? So talagang it is a serious problem, no? So no amount of use it or lose it, get fired until you address some of these bottlenecks. Kulang ang engineer sa DPWH, kulang sa DOTR. There are many, many other issues, no? But I will not belabor the point anymore. Now, final point, Madam Chair. There are many others, pero I will not belabor these issues anymore. I also recommended last year, let's take a look at the expenditure program. Personal expenses, PS. The budget naman is divided into 3 by and large, PS, MOE, capital outlay. Okay? Let me invite your attention to page 115 of the BESF. Okay?
Yoli.
Look at the year 20, you have 2016, 2017, 2018.
Yes.
Okay? Look at the year 2016. It says actual. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay. Why not present it appropriations and this is the actual. Let's say for 2016. This is what we appropriated in 2016. Ito yung naging actual expenditure. That way, every single item under PS, MOE, capital outlay, alam mo, alin gumagalaw, alin ang hindi gumagalaw. Okay? Same thing for 2017. So, this year, you have the term adjusted. Okay? Why not have it appropriations and then the either adjusted, expected, or forecast for the end of the year? Then we know exactly where are we over appropriating for every single item. Huh?
The adjusted.
And then of course 2018 is proposed.
Adjusted is
Can I ask a question with regards to that?
adjusted is
Because
Senator
this
Villar,
is...
with the, of course, with the permission of
Yeah, yeah.
Senator Ralph Recto, is recognized.
Can I ask a question with regards to the classification of the budget?
Yes,
Can I?
You're
Senator
asking
Villar.
me or the
Yeah,
chairman?
I'm asking permission.
Yes, please go ahead. Please.
Okay. Whenever I read the budget, I'm so confused with how you classify the budget. Because when I studied accounting, usually you have, you just divide the cost of goods sold or the overhead. But if you look at our budget,
Correct.
it's PS, MOE,
Yes.
and then
capital outlay.
yeah.
Yes.
And when you ask about the capital, it's part of overhead. It's not the amount you spend to invest. If you
Capital outlay
clarify-
should be investment.
Oh.
Yes.
And then if you look at MOE, there is a combination of overhead
And
investment.
That is correct.
So
That is
you're so
correct.
confused. And I
Correct.
thought that you're confusing us, so we will not know where you are hiding the budget.
That is precisely the point why I'm saying actual, appropriation, actual, so on and so
Really,
forth.
every
Yes,
time I read the budget, I'm so confused. We have to, in order for me to get the real picture of the budget, we have to quarrel. Because I cannot understand why capital would, in business, capital is investment.
Correct.
And then capital for your offices is overhead. And then in the MOE, you include the investment. So you're so confused. So I thought you're doing that to confuse us. So we will not know where is the overhead and where is the investment. So if what you're suggesting, we change how you present the budget, it will be easier for us to analyze the budget.
And it becomes
Mr.
more
President.
transparent.
Yeah. I cannot understand it. We have to interview in order to find out what is the investment for the people and what is their overhead. So,
Rough estimate, Mr. President, 30% is investment and 70% is overhead.
Mr. President, I assure you that there is no intention, or we are not meant to, they don't mean to confuse us. We are, with all due respect, Mr. President, these are, they are IMF prescribed government accounting procedures, Mr. President.
Okay.
It's not just for this year or the proposed budget year, Mr. President. This has been done for decades, long before I became chair of this committee, Mr. President. In other countries, this is also the manner in which capital outlay, NPS, and MOE is also prescribed.
by doing that, you cannot see the overhead and the investment for the
Yeah.
We understand
So-
the concern of Senator Villar because what we actually want to see is ano ba ang napupuntang diretso sa taong bayan? Ano ba ang araro, ang pataba, ang equipment na napupunta sa ilalim ng iba't ibang ahensya na diretso sa tao na hindi travel, allowance, hotel, pamerienda, capacity building, IEC, di ba? Training.
Yeah.
Yan ang ating ibig sabihin.
Lahat yun overhead.
Yes, oo. So we want to see what actually goes to the people in terms of training and equipment or toolkits, etc. Yun ang ibig sabihin ni Senator Villar. Ganon din ang aking tanong actually.
Can I interject again? They have plenty of training, but they don't give equipment wherein they will apply the training to something that will be useful to them.
That is correct.
Whenever you train, you have to give equipment because if you don't, then wag na lang kayo mag-train kasi wala namang kapapuntahan yung training na yon. Diba?
Ang TESDA nandito kanina.
No, TESDA is different.
The importante nga nandiyan ang TESDA kasi, alam ni Senator Joel yan, may mga programa ang TESDA na may kasamang mga toolkits. Yun ba yung TWSP?
But it's only steps.
It's only a small part.
Very small part.
A small part of the budget of TESDA gives toolkits, but
And
actually...
it's not only TESDA, it's all departments
That's
of
true.
government.
That's true.
DTI, DOST,
Ah,
DA.
Mr.
lahat
President,
yan may program.
Kaya nga linakihan po natin yung SSF dahil yung SSF ng DTI ay nagbibigay ng gamit, processing center,
But last year,
toolkits.
they removed all the shared facilities program of DTI. I was looking for it. Mon Lopez said they removed all of it. And why did you agree to remove all of it?
Hindi.
What are we going to do?
Hindi, Mr. President, kaya nga ngayon binalik natin at 1 billion po ang linagay natin. Kasi importante, naniniwala po ako, gaya ninyo, na kailangan binibigyan ng gamit ang taong bayan. Hindi pwedeng train ng train, wala naman silang paglalaanan ng kanilang training o yung kanilang hindi nila ma-apply ang kanila. Kaya ako po ay isa sa inyo na bagamat mahalaga ang IEC, ang capacity building, ang training at workshop, ay kailangan magbigay ng gamit para mapatupad nila ang kanilang kaalaman. Yes, I agree.
Yes, the presiding officer would like to add to the discussion. I remember clearly during a budget hearing in the committee level for the Department of Trade and Industry that it was under my motion that we add or increase the budget for shared service facilities from 200 million to 1 billion pesos so that we may help our MSMEs through these type of facilities and equipment. So I believe now it is already included in the budget.
And may
this council.
comment on that. You know, I start with the Department of Agriculture. The Department of Agriculture will give the farm equipments. But after the farm equipments, we will go to processing for value adding. So
Yes.
it's the DTI who will do the processing. So convergence yun eh. Pag nawala yung DTI, hindi na mapoprocess yung agricultural product kasi yung DA allowed lang to give the farm equipments. It's the DTI which will give the processing equipment so we can process the
Yes.
agricultural produce. So
Ah,
they go together.
Tama. You use the right word, convergence, which is my mantra. I've been telling all agencies. You're correct. From DA to DTI. An example, Mr. President, is in my home province of Antique. It's rich in tuna. May tinatawag pong tuna highway. Ang tunang yan, dinadala pa sa Jensan. Dahil sa layo po ng dinadala niyan, halos wala nang kita ang mga ang source, ang mga Antiqueño, ang mga fisher folks. Kaya importante ang DTI at ang BIFAR ng DA magbigay ng processing facilities para magkaroon ng value added sa tuna highway, sa coastal municipalities o sa waters by Antique Province. Yun po ang isang micromanage na example po, micro example ng kahalagahan ng value added sa mga equipment. So we see that, and I am one with you in recasting a budget that will really give the wherewithal for our small entrepreneurs, our nano-entrepreneurs.
With the permission of the chairman, I will
Yes,
suspend my interpolation and yield to the
No, can you just finish?
to Senator Villar.
Yes. No, we will listen to you.
May I ask for 1 minute to speak?
Senator Villar is in a roll, so I'd like to yield to her.
graduates of TechVo, it's not even 1%. That's not even. What are you talking about? They have a program which is roughly 3-5% of the total budget for scholarship. And right now, it takes about 5 to 6 months before they
Kasi nasa basic principles pa tayo eh.
With the permission of the majority leader,
Session resumed.
just one last manifestation, no longer a question. I would just take up the questions during private time with the chairman of the committee, but a manifestation. Mr. President, I note that there are many wastes in the budget, as mentioned by Senator Villar also earlier. No? So that we have bigger investments for the public, maybe during the period of amendments, we could still recast part of the budget, either to cut the budget, because like I said, 800 billion yung uutangin next year para sa budget na ito. Masyado malaki. Baka wala silang tiwala sa revenues nila for next year. So it's either we cut parts of the budget, the waste, or if we're confident that they can raise the revenues, reallocate that waste to the productive investments in the budget na mapapakinabangan ng pamilyang Pilipino, Mr. President. So with that manifestation, I suspend my interpolation. Thank you very much, Mr.
I agree. And as you close your interpellation, yes, agreed. And therefore, I accept all your interjections and really appreciate it, and would request for a formal memo so that I could remember that for next year's budget. We could give it to the economic team to include that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. To continue interpellations on the basic principles, we now recognize the Minority Leader, Senator Franklin Lalonde.
Yes, Senator Franklin Drilon, our honorable minority leader, is recognized. Session suspended. Yung aso sa TV.
Hindi, kanya na to.
Wala na ako pa naman ito eh.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Pause naman, teka. Tingin na konti, para magandang pose. Nakatingin. Teka, sandali. Pinipigyan na kayo. Tayo na konti. At least one step forward. Okay. Thank you.
Senator Legarda, the minority
Yes,
leader
we're
is
ready,
ready
Mr.
to interpolate.
President.
Mr. President, will the gentle lady from Antique, my kababayan, my kasimanwa, yield the floor to a few questions on the budget?
Yes, Mr. President, from the gentleman minority leader, former Senate President from Panay.
Mr. President, first of all, let me put on record my commendation to our chair of the Finance Committee for all the hard work that the committee put into this very substantial budget. I think this is the biggest in the past budgets that we have examined in this chamber. And I fully concur with the statement and the question asked by the good sponsor in her sponsorship speech when she said, quote, "The overriding constant that guided us in proposing refinements in the national budget proposal touches the very core of the question. Will this budget effect real change among those who genuinely need the government's preferential care and support? The 21.9 million poor Filipinos."
Indeed, Mr. President, we associate ourselves with the trust that the budget presented by our good sponsor has indicated and has crafted in the budget that is being presented for the coming calendar year. However, we wish to examine how consistent the policy pronouncement, if compared to the actual budget allocations that we see in the budget being proposed. So, to start with, Mr. President, may we know what is the program for the reduction of poverty incidence in terms of actual percentages? For example, is it correct to say that this administration intends to bring down the poverty incidence using 2015 as the base year, just for establishing our parameters? Okay lang. Okay lang. Thank you.
Just 1 minute.
1 minute suspension.
Session suspended for...
Can you turn this off?
Mr. President,
Session resumed.
to address the question of the Minority Leader, Mr. President, in the 2018 budget, the allocation for economic services is 30.62% of the total expenditure. And for social services, it's 38.51%.
No,
we can see...
The question that we have raised, Mr. President, I'm sorry we were misunderstood. The administration, I suppose, intends to bring down the poverty incidence at the end of the term of the President.
Yes, Mr. President.
And what is the poverty incidence that is targeted at the end of President Duterte's term?
14%. Mr. President, it is now 21.9%, and the 21.6%, and that's measured every 3 years, no? And
what is it today? 20?
It's 21.6 as of 2015 levels, Mr. President. And by 2022, the projection or the target is to eliminate poverty to the level of 14%, Mr. President.
In 2022?
Yes.
In a span of 5 years, we intend to reduce our poverty by about 7 percent points?
Ay, nako.
Is that correct, ma'am? Approximately?
Yes, Mr. President.
In 2022, the poverty incidence is
14%.
projected to be reduced by 14% from present levels of 21.6%, or roughly a reduction of about 6.4%.
Yes, Mr. President.
Is that correct? 6.4%.
Yes.
And in terms of actual figures, how many heads would that be, or how many Filipinos would that? In terms of actual numbers?
That would translate, Mr. President, to 6 million individuals or families. Individuals less poor by 2022.
How many? 6?
6 million less heads, individuals,
poor, yeah.
by 2022, Mr. President.
Okay. Now, and therefore, we should be looking at the budget of the agencies involved in poverty alleviation if we are going to try to hit our targets.
You're correct, Mr. President. Those with social services and the economic services as well, because this will, of course, generate livelihood for the poor.
But if, yeah, let's look at the social services. My impression is that the government agencies that are supposed to be in synergy and will be involved in poverty alleviation have their allocations only marginally increased, and some may even suffer budget cuts compared to the other agencies. Example, the budget increase of the Department of Education is just an increase of 8% versus the increase in DPWH of over 40%. The increase in budget of the Department of Health is 8.4% versus DPWH 40.3%, and even the Department of Transportation of 33%. The Department of Social Welfare and Development is allocated a budget of 138 billion.
Social services has the biggest share, no?
Or an increase of 6.2%. By sector, therefore, the proportion of the social services in the total budget in 2018 per our analysis will fall from 37.8%, will fall to 37.8% from 40.3% in 2017. There is a marked decrease in the proposed spending in social services from 40.3%, as we said, in 2017, down to 37.8% in 2018. And the SWD, DepEd, TESDA, DOH, which are the agencies which should have a direct, whose work would have direct effect on poverty alleviation, have only received marginal increases in the budgets compared to the compared to DPWH, compared to the Department of Trade, I'm sorry, Department of Transportation, Department of Agriculture, etc. Why is that, Mr. President?
Mr. President, yes, you are factually correct, Mr. President, but we look at the sectoral distribution, Mr. President, and the social services sector will continue to be given the biggest share in the budget with 1.42 trillion in 2018, with a 37.8% share in the overall budget. Though it will have a smaller percentage in the budget compared to this year, 2017, the allocation itself grew by 5.5%, with DepEd also poised to grow 7.8% to implement the basic education program. So we see that the social services sector by sectoral distribution still has the biggest share in the budget pie.
Well, yes, it may have the biggest share in the budget pie because in the case, for example, of the Department of Education, that's a constitutional mandate. However, if the thrust is to alleviate poverty, that policy of assigning, of not providing enough budget to these agencies appeared to be not in sync with the thrust of reducing poverty. That's our point.
Mr. President, may I also state that the economic services will help bring about robust economic activity, and this will translate to jobs, Mr. President. The inadequacy in infrastructure is a major setback in both local or domestic and foreign investment, and therefore the golden age of infrastructure, or the Build, Build, Build program, will try to address that, because the inadequacy in infra is really a very critical constraint. And with the big investment in infrastructure, we hope to bring about more jobs there. So to address this strategically will also reduce poverty, because it will generate 1.6 million jobs with an expenditure of over 8 trillion, Mr. President.
We cannot disagree with that position, Mr. President. But our point is, can we not look at the other non-productive items in the budget and while maintaining the infrastructure budget in these infrastructure agencies, move these non-productive budgets in the other agencies to the
Social
budget,
services.
Yes, to the social services.
I agree with you, and that's what we're doing. That's the reason, Mr. President, why in our Senate version, in our committee report, we improved social services by 2 billion of the DSWD. It has never been done before, and our home for the elderly, for the those with mental sickness, the children in our study centers, when I asked the DSWD, do you have a model center? And no one could say that there was a single model center because they had not received substantial capital outlay. And that is why I feel that it is important that we treat our poor with dignity and we give them these homes all over the country. Apart from that, Mr. President, we also cited the importance of providing micro-enterprises equipment all over the country and in state universities and colleges that have their own livelihood initiatives. That is the reason why we are carving out from some agencies which are slow-moving so that we could provide these social services for the poor of our country.
Yes. For example, looking at the sectoral allocation of the budget, we noticed that those which have direct effect on poverty, such as the power sector or the National Electrification Administration, the budget was even, if I'm not mistaken, was even reduced. There are non-productive budgets like the housing, water supply, feeding, and livelihood receive deductions.
Let me explain that, Mr. President. Housing. Yes. Mr. President, during the hearing, no less than the NHA admitted that 53% of their budget in the past administration from 2011 to 2016 went to houses that were built that remain unoccupied due to lack of consultation, due to no electricity, due to no utilities, and no power. This cannot be done. And so legislation has to be passed for all these 53% in 6 years of homes built of over 20 billion pesos utilized. And so that's the reason why the budget is limited. However, we put a provision in the unprogrammed fund of 2 billion? 2 billion pesos for the AFP-PNP for which the homes were intended but were not availed of.
Well, are we therefore...
But I am with you in providing homes for the poor. In fact, the 53% of the unoccupied homes in 6 years, we asked the NHA to work with the agencies in charge of our informal settlers so that they could use the homes that were built. And,
Mr. President, I hope I am not hearing that we are punishing the homeless because of the inefficiency of our bureaucracy in providing, in not being able to utilize the funds properly. I don't accept that, Mr. President.
I will never allow that, Mr. President.
Yes.
In fact, the NHA has continuing appropriations as of June 30 this year of 41 billion, Mr. President. And so they are not coming out without funds, and we would not allow that. We just want to make sure that they have the absorptive capacity and that they utilize the homes that were built but never been used, more than 53%, and they still have 41 billion to spend till December of this year, Mr. President.
What about on now, there are also other increases which does not go directly into the equation, I mean, which are not directly related to poverty alleviation, but has very substantial increases. For example, the contingent fund of the President increased from 2.5 billion in 2016 to 13 billion in the proposed budget. But continuing, the water supply system, which is directly related to health and poverty, was reduced from 10 billion in 2017 to 6.4 billion in 2018, or a reduction of over 35%. The NEA budget, which again is rural electrification, was reduced from 4.8 billion to 4.2 billion, or a reduction of 12.7%. These are just examples of allocations which we believe is not consistent with the thrust to reduce poverty, because these are budgets which are directly related to poverty reduction. Why is it being reduced if our purpose is to alleviate poverty?
Mr. President, as to your question on the contingent fund.
No, I'm just citing the contingent fund as an example of an increase which...
Yes, I'd like to address that question, Mr. President.
Okay.
Buti na lang po, malaki ang contingent fund. Doon po nanggaling yung 5 billion na ginamit sa Marawi. Because the contingent fund covers funding requirements of urgent projects and activities of national government agencies that need to be implemented or newly created offices or deficiencies in the appropriations, Mr. President. And so,
what are the newly... So can we have a breakdown of the increase, if you want to talk about the contingent fund, from 2.5 billion in 2016 to 13 billion in 2018?
Mr. President, just by the nature of its definition, it's a contingent fund, and therefore we don't have the breakdown now. But because the budget is increasing, yes, the contingent fund has been increasing as well.
Is that the only justification? Just because the budget is increasing, we have to increase the contingent fund? Maybe, as pointed out by Senator Recto, there is room to reduce the expenditure budget because of the budget deficit that is also ballooning, which balloons.
Mr. President, there are just to give you a utilization of the contingent fund appropriation. Let's say the fuel marker.
No, we're talking about 2018, Mr. President,
Yes,
with all due respect, so that we can move forward.
Yes.
We're just talking about the increase. We want to know what is the increase for.
Yes. I am justifying the importance of the contingent fund, and for this year, Marawi was charged with 5 billion. The fuel marker, DOE's oil marker program is also charged there. And because it's a bigger budget, there's also a bigger contingent fund, Mr. President.
I'm sorry, but maybe in the period of amendments, we can look at that again, because we cannot have as a justification for the increase of the budget in a particular agency the fact that the budget is getting larger. I don't think that justification could stand scrutiny, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I assure you that we will exercise our oversight function in the appropriation and the utilization of the contingent fund, Mr. President.
You were...
We will exercise our oversight function.
See. Okay, let that remain on record for whatever it is worth, Mr. President. We will not debate on that because I have not yet heard of any year wherein the oversight functions of the Senate went into checking on the disbursement on the contingent fund. Maybe for the first time next year that will happen. That is why we are just looking at it before we can appropriate it, so that we can still exercise some degree of supervision and control over this lump sum appropriation. But anyway, having said that, Mr. President,
Kung gusto po nyo, buwan-buwan, papatawag ko sila. Paano nyo ginagamit ang contingent fund nyo? Patingin nga. Gagawin ko po yun kung gusto niyo.
Huwag naman. Ha?
Sa budget.
Ano?
Yung increase ng billion, the proportion to budget. Sa budget. Yun ang justification niya.
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Okay.
Session suspended.
Kasi yung this year na magkano? 5 billion na pinag-arawi. Kayo na mag-isip ng kung paano. So, kung tumigil per family, zero interest, no collateral. Sa Marawi, ka na proof na Marawi evacuee siya na nasira ang bahay niya.
Land bank na. Sa land bank.
Housing.
Families in Marawi, who knows? Let's find out.
So? Nagtatanong lang ako, hindi naman ako sumasagot eh. So, sabi niya, okay ba ako? Nagtatanong lang ako eh. Hindi naman ako sumasagot.
Oo nga siya. Ready to resume?
Session resumed.
Ready to resume.
Thank you. So, in our discussion with the good sponsor during the break, she committed that she will review the budgets where there are inordinate and large increases which may not be justified and reallocate the same to the agencies pursuant to the poverty alleviation thrust of the budget.
Yes,
And-
Mr. President. And just to assure you, Mr. President, that in the past years, even this year, there's been a periodic report of the utilization of the contingent fund.
Well,
In fact, there's a long list here. I will no longer read it into the record. And we will exercise, as I said, our oversight function in the Joint Public Expenditure Committee and requested DBM, I put it on record, for a monthly report on the utilization of the contingent fund.
Well, we only cited the contingent fund as an example of the disconnect between the policy thrust of poverty reduction, as so stated by the good sponsor, and certain increases which does not appear to jive with and consistent with the thrust of the good sponsor on poverty alleviation. I would repeat that the citation of the contingent fund is only an example. There are other items in the budget which we can look at carefully, and either because of underspending or really there is no need for such an increase, we can realign to other productive areas of the budget. And I'm glad that the good sponsor has agreed on that general thrust. Now, from the financial point of view, the success of the National Expenditure Program will depend mainly on the availability of funds to cover budget expenditures, including most particularly those for agencies involved in poverty alleviation. But the question is, how will the 2018 budget be financed? What are the assumptions? Specifically, what is the, how much is the proposed train that we are now debating in this chamber affect our projection, especially if the result of the train is not on the level that the Department of Finance would be expecting.
Yes, Mr. President.
In other words, what is the plan in case Congress passes a version different from that proposed by the Department of Finance?
Yes. Let me just read into the record the total proposed revenues. It's 2.8, and that's 16.30% of GDP. And the tax revenues will be 2.67, which is 15.30% of GDP. The BIR is expected to generate 2 trillion, and the BOC 637 billion, and non-tax revenues 166 billion, and other sources as well. Privatization 2 billion, and those are the sources of revenues, Mr. President.
Yes. Obviously, on the tax revenue, that includes the projected 10706. The proposal of the Department of Finance to generate 133 billion, 830 million is not realized because, as reported out by our Ways and Means Committee after 12 or so committee hearings, the Senate version will only generate 59.9 billion, which our Senator Angara feels is the more equitable increase given all the circumstances. How will we fund the shortfall? We will borrow, I assume?
Mr. President, the 2.8 trillion total revenues I mentioned is assuming the train is passed.
Yes.
Assuming the worst, that the train is not passed, but I'm confident it will, is 2.7 trillion, Mr. President. Now, you asked how will government fund it? The government...
the deficit, because the tax revenue budget assumes 133.83 billion from the train. If the train gets derailed, how do we just reduce the budget, or do we borrow?
Well, obviously, Mr. President, then the government will have to incur additional deficit and increase borrowings to compensate for the revenue loss.
We have to borrow again. We have to increase our borrowings.
Half.
Yes.
Well, that's in the event that the train is not enacted into law, then we will borrow 50% and 50% we will just cut spending. Then we will just cut spending, Mr. President.
We will just cut spending.
Yes.
Yes.
The
And-
country's robust macroeconomic fundamentals and our relatively strong fiscal position provide the government with the flexibility to accommodate a slightly higher deficit, Mr. President.
Yes. But maybe by the time we, if I recall our timetable here correctly, we may be able to have an idea of what will be generated out of the train, so that maybe at that point we can adjust the budget and reduce our expenditure program to the extent that we cannot realize revenues to its fullest extent as proposed by the Department of Finance. Would that be an acceptable solution to the chair?
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Mr. President. What is the total amount for foreign assisted projects, infrastructure projects? One of the major areas of economic activity upon which poverty alleviation would depend on, as stated by the good sponsor, would be the infrastructure program, which is designed to generate employment. I assume there are foreign assisted infrastructure projects included in the budget. Is that a correct assumption, ma'am?
Wala akong 2018. I have to look for
2018 foreign assisted projects. For the 2018 foreign assisted projects, Mr. President, it's billion. It's 60.7 billion, Mr. President.
60.63.
63.
63.
60.763.642.
I'm sorry. Just in round figures, ma'am, 63.
60.7.
63.7 billion.
No, 60, Mr. President.
60, I'm sorry. 60.7 billion.
Thank you.
And will this be, this will be in the form of ODAs and grants?
ODAs and grants. ODAs, Mr. President.
ODAs. From China, I assume?
From the multilateral agencies, Mr. President. That includes ADB, the World Bank, Mr. President, the figure includes China and AIIB, which we just approved, World Bank, ADB, and JICA, and JBIC.
It's World Bank, then JICA.
Okay. The Japan ASEAN Integration Fund, Japan Bank International Cooperation, JBIC, JICA, Korean Fund, Development Cooperation Fund, Korean International Cooperation Agency, KOICA, Korean Rural Economic Institute, pati GF. kasama to? The Global Environment Facility, the GEF, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, the International Bank for Reconstruction, IBRD. Those are just, and the World Bank, those are just some of the multilaterals.
Yes. And I assume these are covered by forward obligation authorities, if the
Forward obligations.
FOAs.
Yes, yes, Mr. President, of course, yes.
Yes,
Yes, Mr. President.
just for the record. Now, the debt stock as of today is how much, Mr. President?
6.4 trillion.
6.4 trillion. And we intend to borrow in 2018, 888 billion, is that correct?
888.
Is that is that correct?
Yes, our gross borrowings is 888.
888 billion for 2018.
Our gross borrowing is 888 billion,
Yes.
227 million.
All right, now,
And,
we-
yes, yes. That's split between domestic and foreign borrowing, 80-20, in favor of domestic borrowing.
yes. Now, I think it cannot be avoided that there will be a depreciation of the peso and a possible increase in the domestic interest rates and the increase in the cost of importing of oil. May we know what steps would be taken in order to minimize the adverse impact of these potential headwinds, that's commonly called by the economists, on our country's economy? Just for the record.
Yes, Mr. President, with a 1 peso depreciation of the peso to US dollar, which could be anticipated, there's assuming this is yeah, from 51. Yes, yes. Assuming, Mr. President, there's a further depreciation of 1 peso to the US dollar, so the revenues would be 9.5 higher. Yes, of course. The revenues is projected to increase by 9.5%, disbursements by 2.1 for a budget balance of 7.5.
In case of the
In
depreciation.
case of a 1 peso depreciation in the peso,
No.
US dollar rate.
I'd like to touch briefly on the issue of underspending. I know that this was touched extensively by Senator Lacson and Senator Recto. Part of the reason why there is the issue of underspending has been partly addressed is because of the releases to the LGUs, which are automatically considered as spent the moment it is released to the LGUs. Is that a correct assumption?
I'm sorry.
Yun pong IRA para
Yes.
sa local government units.
Yes.
Pag mayroon ng is it an obligation notice that considers the amount is it the obligation notice that makes the amount spent
IRA's
from the national point of view? Is that
Mr.
correct?
President, the IRA is part of the automatic release.
So it is automatically released?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay, now, but is it correct, did I hear correctly that there is so much unspent funds in the LGUs?
Yes, Mr. President, mostly concentrated on the first-class LGUs, 62% surplus, 62%.
So to the extent that this is not spent, it does not help our economy.
Bakit nga ba? Yes.
And
So we really have to do something. We must do something to teach the local governments to spend their surplus, because this would really spur the. Huh? Or let's just- Can we reallocate? Kasi I wish I could say that we should reallocate it to the 4th and 5th class municipalities, but
we cannot do that because the
Because,
ERA allocation
this
is defined
yeah,
by the
there's a
local
formula.
government code, so you cannot do that.
Yes, there's a formula for ERA. I mean, that's why I said I wish I could. But what we need to do is have a DILG capacity building with DBM on how the first-class municipalities can spend, because they're the highest surplus of 62%. Bakit hindi sila gumagastos?
It's formula based, ma'am.
They need to amend the law. It's amend the law. They don't need the money. But there's always a need. No, first-class municipalities to maybe cities, diba? First-class municipalities. These are the first-class municipalities. Magkano total yun? Let's do something about it, no? How can we reallocate it? Hindi pwede?
Ano pa?
Can the prevent them from getting it and reallocate something? Hindi pwede, no? Let's just amend the local government code. Maybe the minority leader, who is an expert in this, can look at the amendment to the local government code, because it's such a big surplus, sayang. It can
Not
really
only
go.
sayang, it does not, you know, if that is not spent, that does not help
Yes.
in our domestic economy. In fact,
That's
it has
true.
adverse effects on our gross domestic product, because government spending is, I think, about 20% of our GDP.
Imagine, Mr. Projected. Imagine, Mr. President, the projected, what do you call it, surplus savings
Yes.
would be 249 billion in 2018, and we are intending to raise 133
Yes.
billion in the tax reform.
So,
Isn't that
for the
irony?
record, just for the information of
Isn't
the
that an
public
irony?
and the local government units involved, can we spread into the record which local governments are guilty of, not really, I withdraw that,
of not
are not spending properly the funds that are allocated to them? And not only that, while we are on that subject, Mr. President, we know that the limitation on the salary on the PS is a farce. Secretary Jokno knows that all kinds of tricks are being employed in order to exceed the limit for PS. And in other words, the quality of the spending may not even be productive. But it is bad enough that over 250 billion would not be spent. Worst, whatever is spent, issues can be raised as to whether these are productive spending. And in some instances, you even find fake, not fake news, but fake employees, yes, particularly in some regions in the south. Ghost employees.
Let me just put on record, Mr. President.
Yes.
62% of LGUs, 48% are cities, 27% first-class municipalities, and 25% first-class provinces.
We do not have a disaggregation by province or city who would
They have the information.
who would not be able to spend it.
Yeah.
Not now, but it
Yes,
might be
no,
good.
in fact, it's published on the DBM website. Ah, It's published in the Bureau of Local Government website.
Eh, hindi po ako napupunta sa website ng Bureau of Local Government. Eh. Mas mabuti siguro kung ilathala natin dito sa ating debate.
Yan. Gusto nyo malaman yung mga LGU?
Opo, opo. And not only me, the public, I'm sure, in general, would like to know it. And the constituencies of these local governments would like to know it.
Ayun. Gawin mo pala yung sa daan. Oo. Ang ganda. Gusto ko public library. So, we can teach them how to use it. Dapat mandatory ibigay sa pamilya ng 4 people sa mahihirap sa social services. That is good. We cannot force them. Hindi, pero nila galing sa...
Pwede pong maglagay tayo ng program at pupunit sa pera nila. Pero yung program po kung mandatory, pwede nilang kuhanin yung source, ira pa rin sila tayo.
Mr. President, pinapaaral ko po kung paano i-encourage yung LGUs para lumiit. O sana gamitin lahat yan. There's been suggestion here to put up more public libraries, to put up more, to utilize it for education and more basic social services for the poor.
But
Sayang.
yeah, but can we start by
Identifying them.
them?
Yan dito. Dito po. Makati, Cebu, Pasig, Quezon City, Taguig, Mandaluyong, Manila, Davao, Rizal, Caloocan, Zamboanga, Negros Occidental, Ilocos Sur, Cavite, Antipolo, Leyte, Quezon, Cagayan, Palawan, Cagayan de Oro, North Cotabato, Calamba. Eh marami rin mahihirap dyan eh.
Oh,
Santa Rosa, Pampanga,
bakit
Negros
hindi-
Oriental,
why do
Parañaque,
they have
Lapu-Lapu,
spent funds?
Iloilo.
Yeah, so we should.
Puerto Princesa, Bataan, La Union.
No, those are the local government units with unspent funds.
Yes. Oh, ayan, let me go. Zamboanga del Sur, Batangas, Masbate, Dasmariñas City, Agusan Sur, Baguio, Ormoc, Mandaue, Iloilo, Angeles, Iligan, Bulacan. Eh, mahihirap dyan eh.
Oh.
Albay, Cabuyao City, Nueva Ecija, General Santos City, Antique. Haha. Oriental Mindoro, Bukidnon. Oh.
May layo-layo naman sa listahan. So
Bakit dadagdagan pa ang mga lugar na ito? Ang daming pera, hindi ginagamit.
Yes,
O, Cabanatuan, Toledo, Navotas, May Kawayan, Laguna, Kabangkalan, Las Piñas, South Cotabato, Marikina, Ilocos Norte, Batangas City, Pagadian City, Zamboanga del Norte, Davao Norte, Abra, Dipolog, Batak,
just a point.
Muntinlupa,
Maybe
Canton,
this-
Valenzuela, Cebu, Sultan Kudarat, Sorsogon, Benguet, oo, tama yan. Apayao, Malaybalay, Malaybalay,
Yes.
Chair. Taytay, Nueva Vizcaya, Maasin, Lawag, dami. Isabela, Santa Maria, Eastern Samar, marami mahirap dito ba't hindi ginagamit. Narvacan, Kalinga,
Okay,
Cainta, Dagupan,
Can I
Bayugan,
also speak?
Quirino. No, para patas-patas, sabihin lahat. Surigao, Southern Leyte,
sige.
Tarlac, Bohol, Camarines Sur, Hingoog, Ifugao, General Tria, San Carlos, Aklan, Siquijor, Calbay, pagod na ako. Sige, marami.
pagod ka na.
Lipa.
Sige. Let me ask a question
Ang dami.
on that point.
Ba't hindi na ginagamit?
What is the financial subsidies to the LGUs in the 2018 budget?
Akin na yung i-print yun. Give me a copy of that.
Is it correct to say that the LGUs have 6 billion in subsidies or more? According to the DBM secretary, I'm sorry, to Secretary Jokno, there are more than 6 billion that I stated. In other words, you have a situation where you have all those LGUs with unspent funds and they were allocated over 6 billion in subsidies. So can we get the exact amount on the record of subsidies for the LGUs in 2018? By the way, this has increased tremendously since 2016.
5.9
Yes.
billion.
5.9 billion
Yes.
in financial subsidies to the LGUs, which as a group has
94 ba yun?
billion. How much?
249.
249 billion
Yes.
in unspent funds, and we are allocating 6 billion in the 2018 budget as financial subsidies. Something must be wrong with this, Mr. President. Bakit ganito?
Kailangan yun? Mr.
Now, this
President,
does not even, I suspect, excuse me, Mr. President, I suspect that this does not even include subsidies like the subsidy from the excise tax on tobacco, which in the 4 provinces alone producing Virginia tobacco amounted to 15 billion in 2015.
Plus the ERA is the biggest.
Can we have 1 minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
Anong gagawin?
Wala. Isa lang. Pero naka-forward straight na yan. Nakailang may gabi. Nakaiba may in-effort din.
Hindi, from their spent ano na yan, ano na, spended na yan, donated na, from the NG point of view. Pagdating doon, hindi mo kinakasya.
Anong inaano nila? Baka nakalagay nyo automatic. Parang meron yung provision sa law po na hindi pwedeng less than the unit or something. Saan may provision ba? So when you're appropriating, it cannot be less than the appropriation, the unit. Hindi ko alala kung ano. Hindi. Yeah, yun no. Di ba kasi ko lang kung nasa ganyan. Pero separate.
Ready?
Tanong mo lang.
Ha? Ano pa? Oh. Ano? Oh.
Ang wala lang ma'am yung 51 billion. The rest are provided. Like, may 51 billion yung local government support fund. The rest are by
70 calories.
Ano pa? Ano pa yung bring out ko?
Kakain ka ng bar of chocolate and it's 300 calories.
Services to them. And it is the statutory obligation. Low glycemic so statutory obligation. We devolve services to them. And therefore, it's their statutory obligation to provide funding to those devolved services. So, without saying that it's mandatory, dinivolve na sa kanila, and therefore, dapat naging na ng pondo.
Board of Health, which is a default motion. Hindi kasi sila nag-ano eh. Kasi pinapabayaan nito eh.
Walang enforcement eh.
Bakit sila nag-oversight?
After this, anything else? After these investments, what other areas?
Yung ating 3 billion, dapat galing sa kanila, sa Kiwar. Yun, pwede. Bago ibigay yung tira.
Ah, okay.
Alam ko, ito.
Okay na, hanggang 6 ako. Stay to 6. Oo, pagkati, 12 yata kayo po, no? May dinner lang kasi ako kasama ng mga media natin eh. Hindi naman siguro. Depende sa kanila.
But they said also, this is inclusive of their continuing. So meron talagang babayaran sa year. Kumbaga naka-program na siya.
all under EM. It's all under the
yung sige. Sige.
Yes, ma'am. All of them is under.
Sige, ano lang ang wag?
Ang program.
Yes, ma'am. All funds.
Sige, okay. Yeah. Okay na. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
So, Mr. President, Mr. Chair, we have agreed during the break that there are certain limitations imposed by law on our ability to prod the LGUs to spend these unspent funds. Particularly, the bulk would be because of the restriction on the internal revenue allotments given to them, which, as on the record, over 249 billion pesos appears to be unspent and sleeping in the banks in the name of the various local government units. In addition, there are financial subsidies to the LGUs amounting to 6 billion. And as confirmed by the Secretary of the Budget, this does not even include certain special funds like the share of the excise tax on tobacco. And what we have agreed is that in view of the limitations imposed by the substantive law insofar as these funds are concerned, we start with by publishing the balances per records of the DBM, the balances or the unspent funds with the LGUs, and hopefully this will prompt their constituencies to ask for services that can be covered by these funds. We do not know what kind of special provisions we can include in the GAA which can alleviate this problem. The only solution that we can think of right now is probably to look at the enabling statute which entitles them to these benefits. That's
Yes, Mr. President, just to revise your statement or to correct, the 249.2 billion is the projected surplus for 2018, not yet unspent. The
surplus to the LGUs.
Yes, in projected surplus for next year. And the projected surplus for 2017 is 206.5 billion.
Okay, so,
but
yeah.
in 2016, the unspent is 189.6 billion. Malaki pa rin po.
So,
So it's going up. In short, it's going up.
so
Yes.
in another year or two, this could be 1 trillion?
Yes. And here we are enacting new legislation to raise taxes for revenues. And you're correct during the break when you said we consider it obligated in the national level. And that's why, bakit mahirap pa rin ang tao? Bakit kulang pa rin ang pondo, sinasabi nila? Eh, nandiyan naman sa lokal na pamahalaan ng pondo na hindi naman ginagamit lahat. So, but our hands are tied because they have autonomy because of the local government code. So either we amend the law or we, I don't know, you help us how do we compel the local governments into spending it for the people?
Well, there must be a solution.
Yeah, the solution would be to amend the local government code because we cannot earmark what is due them.
Well, the agency which would have the best expertise would be the Department of Budget and Management. The secretary is here.
We will ask him to.
They can initiate legislation that we can craft along this line, because this is something that, you know, regardless of which side of the political fence you are, we must solve. Well,
Mr. President, that would be a good point to include in the budget reform bill. And after the budget is passed, your Committee on Finance can probably hold the hearing also with the Bureau of Local Government Finance under the Department of Finance, the DOF, to see. And I would seek your assistance in crafting a strongly worded provision in our GAA to compel our LGUs to use the projected surplus.
well,
And thank you for bringing
standing
it to the
here,
attention.
you know, I'm at a loss how to do it, but without running afoul with the decision of the Supreme Court, which would disauthorize any management of this local government fund because of the principle of local autonomy. This has already been decided by the Supreme Court, and any intervention may not meet with approval by the Supreme Court. So in any case, we can do this afterwards, and let's put our heads together, but maybe the DBM can take the lead as they are the experts in this.
Yes, Mr. President.
Now, just to highlight, and okay, the other thing that we would like to point out is there appears to be a very substantial increase in the farm to market road. How much was it in the NEP, and how much was it in the GA, in General Appropriations Bill, insofar as farm to market roads are concerned? And this is not only in DPWH, this is also in DA, and I don't know what other agencies.
Are you referring from last year or from NEP to GAB?
Presently and next year. This is what we call farm to pocket road or something.
I hope not. Nasaan ang FMRs?
Yung mga OPA, pag natigal budget ng OPA, and then you analyze all of this, and yung mga agencies na nandito, bigyan siya ng notice that when it comes to the budget, these agencies will ask questions. Di ba? Example ng OPA. Kasi isang agency lang sa
Mr. President, under the locally funded projects, FMRs, there's an addition of 2.5 billion.
From the NEP to the GAB?
Yes.
How much? 2.5 billion.
Yes.
That's only from the NEP to the GAB.
Yes.
Without the Senate amendments yet.
Yes. But really, Mr. President, there's a need for the construction of FMRs. That's part of connectivity, of connecting the rural areas to their
So
to their
if that is
markets,
so,
yes.
why did DBM appropriate 2.5 billion less than what the GAB provided. If it is that critical and urgently needed, DBM proposed 2.5 billion less than what the GAB proposed. So there must be other reasons for the DBM to have...
Maybe the representatives of the people, the congressmen, know their districts better? I don't know.
I see. I see.
Malay ko.
Huh?
Malay ko.
Okay, so just on record that maybe the DBM knows less than the congressman. Mahina ito, you know, their level of competence is 2.5 billion pesos less than that of the congressman. Tama ba yan? All right. No, I just want to see how it evolved into an 11.68 billion fund from the National Expenditure Program. Now, just one final point. I promised you that I will end this at 5 p.m. What is the total intelligence fund in the budget? And how has it expanded from 2016? The reason we're asking this, Mr. President, is that we must concede that this is a non-productive item in the budget. Unlike social services, unlike infrastructure, this is a non-productive item in the budget in the sense that it does not generate economic activity nor assist in the alleviation of poverty. And so we would like to know how much was the intelligence fund in 2016, in 2017, and in 2018, and which agencies would be entitled to this.
Mr. President,
Yes.
the 2018 Senate version of confidential and intelligence funds would be 6.5 billion.
6.5 billion. This is the Senate version for 2018.
Yes, Mr. President.
And
Mr.
can-
President,
What?
as having had my master's in national security administration and having taken up intelligence as a subject in my MNSA, I'm a great believer in the importance of intelligence information, not just in the military, but also in our economic life. It is always important to be 10 steps, important to know, to be 10 steps ahead for information from intelligence gathering. This applies not just to the PNP and to the ISAP or to the NICA, but also agencies that need information gathering to be able to make enlightened choices, Mr. President.
Yes.
So while it may not directly impact, like the CCT, to the poor of our country or the SSF under DTI, but knowing our threats and our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities, and to be able to make rational and wizened decisions based on these threats, Mr. President, I think that would serve us in good stead. And we don't like any more crisis like Marawi to happen. Let it not be said, Mr. President, that our agencies of government would say that they were not given the funds to gather information for them to make preparations for whatever hazards, whether security hazards or natural hazards. I think it's important, especially during these times.
We are not raising the issue at this point of the importance of the intelligence fund. We're just asking for the allocation. And did we hear correctly the good sponsor that it is that under the Senate version 2018, the total intelligence fund allocation is 6.5 billion?
Yes, Mr. President.
Can we have a breakdown which agencies would be entitled to this? Just a breakdown. Since these are on general principles, we will not even raise issues on the need for it.
Where's our breakdown? The Office of the President has 2.5 billion.
2.5 billion for the OP.
Yes. D&D has
This is for 2018, huh?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay.
The D&D has one, you want the exact number? 1.89510. 1.8 billion
Okay.
for the D&D. The DILG has 989.6.
What?
The Department of Justice has 367.2.
Can I have what is it? The PNP or DILG?
The DILG, Mr. President.
DILG is how much?
Of which the PNP is under the so that's
So
There's
DILG
also-
including the PNP.
including the PNP already.
How much is it?
989,629.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I see from my notes here, PNP Intelligence Fund 1.1 billion. Is this erroneous? And then we have an Upland double barrel, 900 million. And then we have a DILG Masa Masid, 500 million. This is about
Mr. President,
about 2.5.
the Intel Fund of PNP 2969, the Intel Fund of the PNP is 969 billion 29.
969 billion, and then
29
the
billion.
Upland double barrel is how much?
Mr. President, Upland Double Barrel is a program.
Yes.
That would not be considered intelligence fund. That's a program of the PNP, the ILG PNP. Upland Double Barrel.
So this would be subject to standard audit?
Yes, Mr.
accounting?
President. Yes.
Good. Because I'm giving advance notice that we will ask when the PNP budget comes how the present 900 million under the Upland double barrel was utilized, as this is an open accounting system, not intelligence funds.
Oh, yun na lang. Sige. Yes, Mr. President.
Now, as we said, since the good sponsor has asserted that the Upland double barrel is not part of the intelligence fund, but a regular program, we are giving advance notice that we will be asking on the disbursement in the current budget of 900 million for Upland double barrel. How was this used?
May Intel din double barrel? Is it part of the 969? Ah, the Intel fund of the double barrel, Mr. President, 163 is part of the 969 Intel fund.
Of the 969, 153?
63
163
is the double barrel.
is the double barrel. So the balance of, from the 900 million or something like 650 or so million would be subject to ordinary auditing rules and accounting.
Mr. President, the balance of the 900 under the PNP would be the usual Intel fund of the PNP.
No, I'm not, excuse me, ma'am. I know that you're tired. Just on this point,
Yes.
I have 3 minutes, as promised you.
Yes.
You said that PNP has Intel funds of 969 million.
969, Yes, Mr. President.
Out of that 169 million, 163 million
Double barrel.
pertains to
The
the
double
intel
barrel.
funds of the double barrel.
Yes.
Now, how much, in what activities would the remaining balance be
Do you
used?
have the activities? I can ask the PNP to submit the activities to which they could attribute the balance of that, Mr. President.
Yes, as I said, when we take up the budget of the
Yes,
PNP,
yes.
we would, it's not fair for us to ask this question. That's why
Of course,
we're
yes.
asking that that this be, that the PNP prepare for this.
We will prepare for that during the DILG hearing. In
Yes.
fact, now they hear it, we will ask the DILG, the PNP, to submit to the office by tomorrow the
Yes.
breakdown of their 969, including double barrel.
No. The balance of the 900.
69 minus
900 minus
double barrel.
163 is
806.
7, 9, 3, is 8. 737 million. In other words, the double barrel budget of 900 million consists of 163 as intelligence fund and 737 million as ordinary, as a program funds for an activity. We would like, at the appropriate time, we would like to spread into the record how much how much was spent out of the 737 and for what purpose. And also transform that to 2018, what do they intend to utilize this budget for? So we have made it to record.
We
1
will
minute.
be ready with that
Yes.
and request the DILG to submit.
Yes.
Yes.
The Masa Masid of 500 million, both in the 2017 and 2018, is that intelligence funds also? No.
The Masa Masid is a program,
It's
and
a program?
not
Okay. So
part of
just
the
advance
income fund.
notice, we'll also be asking questions on this, how was this used?
For DILG.
Because these are very substantial increases in non-productive, you know, the,
It's for-
items. When we say non-productive, we are saying that in relation to sectors like infrastructure, social services.
Yes.
That's the context
Yeah.
in which we denominate it as non-productive.
Yes, in fact, we appreciate that. Yes, you're being able to scrutinize the budget and actually making this, the utilization of these funds very transparent, and the accountability of departments into big programs. That's greatly appreciated. And we will ask them to present that to us as well.
Well, at this point, we wish to thank the good sponsor for responding to our questions on general principles, and we will still have a lot of questions, but we can ask these questions and clarifications when the agency's budget comes to the floor. So with that, we thank the sponsor for her patience in answering our questions and clarifying and explaining to our people certain principles that are embodied in the 2018 proposed expenditure program. Thank you very much.
We greatly appreciate the interventions of the minority leader, and really appreciate especially the focus on the utilization of local government funds, and request him to submit together with the agencies present here a special provision for the budget so that we can compel the local governments to spend it.
As we said, Mr. President, the DBM is in the best position to do this because they have access to all of this data. So we can make our contribution, but we would request the DBM to do it.
Majority Leader?
One Gordon.
Session suspended.
We ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resume. Before we resume, the chair would just like to ask, which portion of the budget are we tackling today? Is it still the general principles?
We were tackling the basic principles, Mr. President. And then now, we will now move on to the departments that are scheduled for today. And these are the Department of Finance and its attached agencies, the Budgetary Support to Government Corporations, Department of Budget, the allocation to local government units, the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Fund, the Contingent Fund, Miscellaneous Personal Benefits Fund, Pension and Gratuity Fund, and a program appropriations. We will start interpellations on these agencies, Mr. President. So I call on the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Finance, Senator Legarda, to sponsor these budgets. And then Senator Sherwin Gatchalian will interpolate.
Senator Lauren Legarda is recognized together with Senator Sherwin Gatchalian to interpolate. Would the sponsor want a session suspended? Boss, wala pa, hindi pa.
pwede mo na rin. Pag nandiyan dyan, tatangin ko siya. So, Ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session resumed.
Mr. President, as I mentioned before the suspension, the budgets of the attached agencies and the agencies under the Department of Finance and the DBM are on deck. So may we continue the interpellation with the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Finance, Senator Lorne Legarda. This time to interpellate Senator Sherwin Gatchalian.
Yes, Senator Lorne Legarda is recognized and Senator Gatchalian to interpolate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I begin my short interpolation, Mr. President, hindi po ako mapakali kanina when they were talking about the local government issues. So I took it upon myself to call our budget officer in Valenzuela dahil nabanggit ho ni ma'am kanina 300 million raw natitira sa kanila. So tinawagan ko po yung budget officer nung sinabi ko pong may 300 million pala kayo. Sabi nila, sir, wala ho kaming 300 million. Meron ho tayong 300 million na utang.
O bakit ganon?
So, Mr. President, I think not to dwell on this topic for a long time, I would like to urge the BLGF, because I think the BLGF is the source of information that is a basis for the BESF. Sana ho, tignan na lang ho mabuti kung ginagamit ho natin yung tamang information as a basis where if the local governments have budget surplus. Actually, yung 300 million na yon is cash in bank. So in 2016, meron ho silang cash in bank, but that 300 million will be used to pay off debts in 2017. No? In fact, that was confirmed by one of the staff earlier, that the 2016 number or account includes the continuing obligation for the following year. No? The number is not wrong, but for this purpose, it might not be the right information to use. So before we chastise and shame the local governments nationwide, let's double check whether the information is really the right information to determine whether they have budget surplus.
Okay, that's important that we clarify. First, the 249 is a projected surplus.
What I
Wala
understand, ma'am, is
Yes.
that's the cash in bank at the end of the year.
No. The 249 billion mentioned by earlier is a projected surplus of local governments, which would include provinces, cities, and municipalities, the breakdown of which is with the Bureau of Local Government Finance. The present year, it's 206 billion total. And but we can't tell yet because it's only 3 quarters. And 2016, the figure was, I put it on record, 189? I think I put it on record earlier. 189 billion, yun ang totoo. Kasi nakalipas na yung 2016, there's 189 billion of surplus unutilized by the local governments, but the 249 is a projected surplus based on their projections.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that you clarified.
Yes, Mr. President.
So, you know what we'll do? Since we can't
Double check lang po, ma'am.
utilize the funds anyway, when the budget is passed, I'd like to conduct a hearing with the Bureau of Local Government Finance to ascertain the number and the nomenclature used in naming this fund,
Because if you look
assuming there's a surplus.
Mr. President, if you look at the source of the fund, and I think the lady from BLGF is here, the source of information is the treasurer. The treasurer keeps the cash. So, alam niya ho yung cash in bank, pero hindi niya nakikita ano yung na-obligate na, because the obligation comes from the budget officer.
Yes, you're correct.
So, I think it's just a matter lang of
Correct. Nakikita niya
double checking.
yung cash, but hindi niya alam ang mga dapat bayaran.
Yes,
Oo.
unless they coordinate. But I think just to move forward, Mr. President.
But what's important, Mr. President, is the 180 more or less billion in 2016. Paso na po yun, talagang hindi ginamit.
Yeah.
So may 180 billion unutilized by local governments in 2016.
Right. Mr. President, I would probably go deeper into that 180 billion to see whether why, because no, working in the local government for a long time,
Yes.
it's really the attitude of local government to exhaust everything
kaya
in their budget. That's
nakakapagtaka,
why
diba? Oo.
medyo nagulat ako when they said that Valenzuela had 300 million pesos. Parang sabi ko, it's unusual, no? Highly unusual. Nevertheless po, ma'am, we'll just have to probably ask BLGF to double check, no, the information and whether that information is the correct information for our purpose in determining surpluses.
In fact, I would ask the Bureau of Government, Local Government Finance to give us the breakdown of the 2016. Kasi yun, alam natin, hindi na projection yun. Talagang nasayang na yun, surplus yun. Ano yung surplus na yun, anong mga LGU yun. But 2017, we can't say, and 2018 is just a projection.
Yeah, ma'am, I also inquired yung calamity fund, no? And in the NDRMC law, you're allowed, for example, you don't use your calamity fund, it accumulates, but you can use it to buy pre-disaster equipment.
Yes.
So in most LGUs, they also exhaust that calamity fund because they use it to buy pre-disaster equipment. So they buy rubber boats, they buy amphibian equipment. So nauubos rin yun, no? In fact, again, no, double check ni Valenzuela, it's really wala na natira sa calamity fund because they used it to buy pre-disaster equipment. And I would assume this probably is a normal activity in all LGUs. But just to move forward po, let's
thank you for that.
Yeah,
Yes.
let's just double check po from the BLGF.
Yes.
Ma'am, going into my questions, ma'am, I would like to, yesterday we had a hearing about Malampaya Fund and the potential use of Malampaya Fund. But during the hearing, we had problems coming out with accurate information, especially the balances of the calamity fund. So for the record, Mr. President, how much is the total collection from the royalties of all service contracts? No?
Sorry. It's 242 billion as of September of 2017 for the receipts from Malampaya funds, Mr. President.
240 billion from all, no? From all the service contracts.
Yes.
Tama po ba?
242 billion, 261 million.
And from Malampaya Fund, magkano po yun sa Malampaya Fund? Diba, iba pa ho yung service contracts.
Hindi, yun yung Malampaya.
That's Malampaya.
That's Malampaya.
Okay.
Yes.
And then, may I inquire if this 240 billion pesos is intact?
There's been releases of 43.6 billion, and the balance is 198 billion 566 million.
After July.
Mr. President, the balance in their books is approximately 198.5 billion. However, this account was mixed with the general fund, and it has been utilized. However, it does not mean that it's zero funds because they can have a source of funds to fill in the 198 billion. And I understand the utilization of the 198 has been furnished to your office.
Yes.
They can also give me, please. Yes.
Ma'am, what was not so clear yesterday was there are several proposals by our other colleagues to use Malampaya Fund for different purposes, no, to pare down debts, to launch a energy project. Kung na-commingle ho itong funds, how do we now use the 198 Malampaya fund that was accrued to it? But there is a special account, no? But the cash itself, it's commingled. No?
Yes.
So if ever you want to use that 198 fund, what is the process?
Yes. Once there is an earmark utilization, proposed utilization of the fund, then they will provide the funds needed to fund the part of the 198 billion.
And the earmark should go through Congress, or it's just a
No.
presidential decree?
Hindi na batas, no? I don't think a law is needed, Mr. President. An executive order, you sure, by the President, approval by the President.
So it's just a mere approval of the President. So for example, the President would want to use part of that 198. Siya lang ho gagawa ng executive order at pwede na ho yun. Is that the process?
Yeah, okay. We report also.
Yeah. There must be reports given to Congress, Mr. President, but it's mere, I understand, it's the approval of the President that's necessary.
All right. Okay.
Approval of the president.
Automatically appropriated.
But it can be used for the purpose.
Yes, yes. It can only be used, Mr. President, for the purpose for which the Malampaya Fund
Right.
was intended. It needs the approval of the President. No need for another legislation from Congress. But we can exercise, and we should, our oversight function.
So the approval of the President will now trigger DBM to allocate that specific fund.
Yes.
Saan niya kukunin ho yun? No? Diba?
We will provide the cash.
They will provide the cash
But the cash is provided by Congress. Diba?
from the Treasury.
We fund it.
The Treasury will fund the Malampaya funds, Mr.
But
President.
theoretically, all the funds are already appropriated for various accounts. Diba?
The funds will come from the Treasury, Mr. President, and they will find the funds, whether through domestic borrowing, foreign borrowings.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. President. And lastly, Mr. President, I know that DOF is the chairman of PSAM, the Power Sector Assets and Liabilities Management. And may we know exactly how much is the outstanding obligation of PSAM? Again, yesterday we had a hearing, and we had this one is actually problematic because we had to compute 3 or 4 times to reach a number, and we found out that even that number hanggang ngayon po mali pa rin. No? So ano ba talaga ang utang ho ng PSAM?
722.5 billion total liabilities.
Okay.
Wow, laki.
722.5.
22.5 billion.
Just for the record.
Total liabilities,
Yes.
Mr. President.
For the record, yesterday, the representative of PSAM, or from PSAM, stated that the liability is 491. So medyo
720.
kaya nga medyo iba-iba po yung number na kukuha
Total
natin.
liabilities is 722.5 billion.
So ito po yung utang na babayaran ng PSAM.
Hindi lang utang. Ang utang po dito ay 275.36 billion, various banks, utang.
Okay.
Ang lease obligations ay 230.98 billion.
Okay. Magkano po ang utang, Mr. President?
275.36.
275. And I would assume this is stranded debt.
Mostly, but they have to desegregate kasi halimbawa, dependent on the sale, future sale.
The utang ho kasi meron yang different types. No? May stranded debt, may stranded cost, merong mga other liabilities. So this is where the problem came in because kahapon po we were extracting that information pero hindi mabigay-bigay. And no, kung ilagay ho natin yung sarili natin kung tayo po uutang, dapat alam ho natin kung magkano yung utang ho natin. Pero sa PISAM, hindi ho nila alam kung magkano yung utang natin. So paano ho natin alam kung magkano babayaran natin kung hindi ho natin alam yung utang?
Ang dapat bayaran, ang utang na portion dito ay yung 275 billion.
Okay, and that's is that stranded debt and stranded cost? Because those two are being charged to the consumers. So alin po dito sa 722 ang charge sa consumers, alin po ang hindi pwede i-charge sa consumers?
ERC will have to approve the budget.
Yes, tama nga ho, ERC.
ERC will have to approve which part of the debt will be charged to the
That's
consumer.
not correct po, ma'am.
No?
They can only approve stranded debt and stranded costs. The other ones, they cannot approve. That's under the IPIRA. Yun lang ang pwedeng ipasa sa consumers.
So they have this one. We cannot, I mean from our end,
Yeah.
it's really isang hulu. At least hindi mayin nila to. Which portion is, kasi it's compounded na eh. They were not able to, ERC was not able to approve.
So,
But anyways, ma'am,
let me clarify, because the 275, isn't ERC supposed to decide how to deal with that? No? No.
Which portion? Kasi that's why PISAM has to submit several documents.
PISAM will have to submit the details of the 275 billion. Once they've submitted the breakdown of the 275, and then ERC will determine
Right. Tama.
which of that.
I'm assuming that the 275, to be, again, just for the record, yesterday, the representative from PISAM reported that it's 223 billion.
Bakit iba yung
Ngayon is
figures?
275 na. No? And yesterday, ang sabi niya, ang total debt ng, or total obligation ng PISAM is 491. Ngayon is 722. My point, Mr. President, is hindi alam ng PISAM kung ano talaga ang utang natin. Yun po ang punto ho natin eh.
They have their figures from PISAM. So PISAM should be giving you the same figures.
PISAM is not giving us the accurate figure. That's why I took it upon it now to ask.
May we ask DOF to submit
Yes.
to the chairman of the Energy Committee and the Finance Committee the details of the total debt, including lease obligations of PISAM.
Yes. Let me just repeat, ma'am,
As of
Mr. President.
2016 December.
PISAM's job is to liquidate the debt.
Yes.
Tama?
Yes.
In order to liquidate the debt, the first step is to know how much
Yes.
do you owe. But at this time,
They're not sure how much they owe.
parang nawawala ho sila kung magkano po utang ng bansa. No? So in any case, just to...
As of 2016, Mr. President, the cut-off, we are certain that the amount is 722.5 billion as of
Okay.
December of 2016.
Correct.
We will ask them
Yeah.
to give us the breakdown. What are lease obligations? What are stranded costs, stranded debt, and then which of that will be ascertained by ERC to be passed on to consumers? It should not. Of course not. We should not.
It's being passed on as we speak,
Yes,
Madam
but
President.
kaya nga eh, mali eh.
Yes, it's...
Paano ba yun? Oo. Under EPIRA.
Actually, the bill of Senator Recto calls for the use of malampaya to pay off the stranded debt and stranded costs. No, that was the concept. That's why we had that hearing yesterday. But unfortunately, hindi ho namin ma-extract information sa PISAM, so we couldn't reconcile the records. But, ma'am,
Does DOF have accurate records? You have.
they have to
You can
because they're
submit it
the
by
chairman.
tomorrow. Okay. Huh? Ito eh. This whole thing can be, they actually have it now.
Yeah.
This whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, Mr. President, not to, again, belabor the
No,
chamber.
that's very important. I'm
Yeah.
glad that you have brought it to our attention. Otherwise,
And-
I did not realize the depth of their debt.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Mr. President, aside from the kung 700 yung utang, only the stranded costs and stranded debt can be passed on. The rest, should be paid or should be borne out of the sale of,
Of the
assets.
assets, yes.
So my next question, ano yung
Assets
sale
nila.
na gagawin natin? At kung kulang pa rin, ano yung gagawin natin? Because, Mr. President, every day that we don't pay our debts, it incurs interest and penalties. At pinapaikot lang ho ng PSAM. The problem is, pinapasa ho to sa atin as consumers.
Kaya nga, tama po kayo. Una, alamin natin ang ating utang, ang kanilang utang. Pangaliwa, ano ba dyan ang pwedeng ipasa? Pangatlo, ano ba ang total assets nila? At pang-apat, ano ang kanilang plano sa assets at may timeline sa kanilang liquidation ng assets?
Yes. We are charged, ma'am, 22 centavos per kilowatt hour for stranded debts and stranded costs. Wala pa ho dito yung other obligations. And that's where the problem is because those other obligations incurs interest and penalties. No?
May I ask you the question, what caused all this debt?
Well, during the Napocor days, when the power sector was vertically integrated, they were borrowing to expand. They were also entering into the take-or-pay contract, the infamous take-or-pay contract, which became stranded costs, no, what we call right now. So lahat ho ito nag-compound na. Portion of it, binabayaran ng consumer, portion is through asset sales. But the asset sales, huminto na ho eh. So ano ngayon ang gagawin natin? Because gumugulong at gumugulong lang ho yan.
Stopping asset sales when we should really liquidate and sell the assets so that we can liquidate.
22 cents. But, Mr. President, again, not to belabor the chamber, we would just require DOF and PSAM to submit to us the official records.
And to reconcile their figures.
Yes, submit to us the official records, reconcile the records, and on a later time, we will call for a hearing from the Committee on Energy to finally hear the strategy from PSAM, kung ano po yung gagawin. Because again, every day that we don't pay our debts, it incurs. At tayo lahat nagbabayad nun. So we have to really come up with a strategy to stop the bleeding ASAP.
That's a very good point, and thank you for bringing it to our attention. The DOF will give furniture office with a copy. It's actually here, the hard copy.
Thank you, Mr. President, and that's it, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Session suspended for 1 minute. Yeah, fine. Okay. Cancel ko na dinner tayo. Stay. 30 minutes. Gugutom din ako sa inyo.
May sila.
Yeah.
Ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session resumed.
Mr. President, for the continuing interpellations, may we recognize Senator Dick Gordon.
Senator Gordon is recognized to interpolate Senator Legarda. Majority Leader, to the indulgence of the body, I would like to make a suggestion so that the gentle lady from Antique and Malabon does not have to stand the whole day. Maybe we could do the what we've done in the past, which is actually put a table for her to sit down and actually sit and answer interpellations, if that's all right with the body.
Mr. President, we used to do that with Senator Pimentel, the older one.
Yes, Mr. President. Yes, to our distinguished colleague. I recall in the last budget hearing, Senator Lauren Legarda was actually seated, so she didn't have a hard time. If that's all right with the sponsor, or
We can ask the Sergeant at Arms to prepare that.
yeah. For the meantime,
If there is
maybe
no
we can-
objection, if there
Yes.
is no objection,
Yes,
it is allowed.
For the meantime, we can continue interpellation while they're preparing the seat and table.
Okay lang kay Senator Gordon?
Sure.
Sige. Dito lang. Can we have a table? Sino po mag-aayos ng table?
So we'll suspend session for 4 minutes. Or maybe not delay the proceedings.
Marami po nakatago dyan. Ano yata, DOF yata? DOF. Parang DOF na. Sure mo siya ng DOF. Sa Taiwan. Yun na. Kasi kung ganyan yata, balik lang premium. Ganyan yun. Pero alam ko, in-adjust na niya. So, mali pa rin. The answers to this people. Mix. Sinusun mo na lang eh. Gringo sa umaga hapon ako. Yan ang babawasan mo dito. Okay.
Hello, sound check.
Okay. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Will the gentle lady yield a few questions on the Department of Finance?
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be brief. As you know, we have been investigating the Bureau of Customs lately. Not only have they been short on targets, but they have also been exhibited a very, very corrupt streak, not just this year, but for many years. And now they have graduated into drugs. And the provisions of facilitation of trade, such as the green lane, the red lane, or the yellow lane, have practically been violated left and right, defeated by the TARA system. It would appear that we are not even collection savvy, but we are also very, very poor in terms of efficiency. And part of the reason for that, I suppose, is the lack of supervision or monitoring. Before I go on to my questions, I'd like to ask the Department of Finance how they are going to solve this problem, because I did not ask any more questions on the tax increases yesterday for lack of material time. But I just would like to sidetrack a bit here, because that bothers me, that we are asking our countrymen to pay more taxes, and yet there are budgets set for agencies like BIR or Customs, and we always fall short for various reasons. In the case of Customs, rank corruption, inefficient way of handling the products as they come in, and now graduating into something more pernicious. Not just pernicious, but very, very deadly, drugs. So, first of all, I'd like to ask, what does the Ministry or the Department of Finance intend to do about that? I know it's a general question, but I would like to know the general direction. We had Sid La Peña here yesterday, and he gave us a list of things that they're going to do.
Mr. President, as of now, the green lane has been suspended as of last week of September, and only the SGL red and yellow and X-ray are operational, Mr. President.
Actually, the green lane indeed has been suspended, but the wonderful thing that I think Mr. La Peña is doing is that he is no longer going on the benchmarking. He wants to make sure that all collections are heavily monitored. And even if he does that, I expect the Department of Finance to show me some cogent and efficient way of guarding that the collections don't go down. Because you are the ones, the Department of Finance sets the targets for collection. And so you ought to have, you ought to be very stressed when they fall back on collection. I don't want to use my experience, but way back in the early 1970s when I was working for Procter & Gamble, or rather 60s, late 60s, we monitored our sales almost every week and looked at it against target. What is the plan now of the Department of Finance to ensure that we get the collection target? For example, last year, we had a target of 460, if I'm not mistaken, and 456, and the collection performance in 2016 was 398 billion. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel here? And that is by benchmarking pa yun, ha?
Hindi, kasi wala yung head ng agency. Ayoko mag-defend pag wala yung head ng agency.
Sino wala?
Customs, wala. Hindi pwede. O, bukas sila. Pagod na rin ako.
Session suspended.
Wala.
Well, the Department of Finance is here, Your Honor.
Session
The
suspended.
question is really directed to the Department of Finance.
Yeah, suspend session. Suspend. Session is suspended. Yeah.
Wala magtuturo sa akin.
President,
Sabog.
ready to resume?
Session resumed.
Mr. President, I move to suspend the session until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning and ask that the agencies that are being asked by Senator Gordon, which is the Bureau of Customs, to be all here present in full force, and also the Insurance Commission, because the heads of the Insurance Commission, because I will be calling on them. Wala din, bukas na lang. So I move to adjourn the session. No, sorry, not adjourn. Suspend the session until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
There's a motion to suspend the session till 10 a.m. tomorrow. There being no objection. Motion is...
Wait.
Ang BBM okay na si Secben sa opisina ko.
Oo nga pala, teka. All right, I withdraw my motion, Mr. President.
Yeah. At saka NEDA.
I withdraw the motion.
Yes, motion withdrawn.
NEDA. Yung F lang, yung Insurance Commission tsaka Customs. Look at Secretary Jock. He's there in my office waiting. Si DBM nandiyan na and all the funds. Yeah, wala na.
Mr. President,
Yes, Majority Leader.
there are no other reservations to interpolate the budgets of the Department of Budget and Management and all the attached agencies under this agency
And NEDA.
and NEDA. Therefore, I move that we close the interpellation on these agencies and departments and consider the budget of the Department of Budget and Management and NEDA and its attached agencies as deemed submitted for the body's consideration. The Minority Leader wishes to be recognized before you approve my motion, Mr. President.
Minority Leader.
We have no objection to the motion of the Majority Leader. Just a caveat. In case anyone would have questions on some of those funds particularly, that the Senator be allowed to ask questions just on those funds that are being...
Tell us ahead of time so that they can...
Yes, so that,
As long as the Committee on Finance is informed ahead of time.
Yes, yes, Mr. President.
We have no objection to that, Mr. President. We carried that over into our motion. So I am now calling for the submission of the budget of the Department of Budget and Management, allocation to local government units, National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Fund, Contingent Fund, Miscellaneous Personal Benefits Fund, Pension and Gratuity Fund, and Program Appropriations, budgetary support to government corporations, the Department of Finance except Bureau of Customs and the Insurance Commission. All the rest, and the NEDA, and all agencies under NEDA. And all attached agencies in these departments that I mentioned, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion of the Majority Floor Leader, all the budgets of the departments and agencies mentioned by the Majority Floor Leader and its attached agencies is closed and consider the proposed budget as deemed submitted. I so move.
Ladies and gentlemen, correction, listen, quiet please. There is a slight correction. All the agencies that we mentioned are already deemed considered submitted, all right? Except that the request of the chairman of the Committee on Finance, hindi, okay na, kahit suspend, announcement na to. The NEDA is still, should come tomorrow morning in case a member of the Senate wishes to ask a question. But it's deemed submitted, so if they do not ask in the morning, you're done. Just to be here, just be here. Yung NEDA lang, yung NEDA. Okay. Customs, Insurance Commission, and NEDA, be here tomorrow. All the rest, submitted. Okay. So we're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Mr. President, there is a request by one of the members that the budget of NEDA might be considered tomorrow, although it's already deemed submitted. So I move to suspend the session until the...
Senator Gordon.
Yung NDRMC na andyan eh. Tapusin na natin kung andyan. Mr. Chairman, point of inquiry. Is the NDRMC here?
We'd like to ask the staff, the pages, to find and locate the agency NDRRMC.
National Disaster.
Session is suspended while locating the said agency.
Dick.
Sa inyo. The national disaster is a disaster. They are not here today.
Okay, Mr. President, we're ready to resume. So with that announcement, Mr. President, I move to suspend the session until 10 o'clock in the morning tomorrow, October 6, 2017.
Yes, before we suspend session, just a reminder of what Senator Gordon had requested, that the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Council be also present tomorrow. They are disaster today because they are not here. They're supposed to be here. So session is suspended until 10 a.m. tomorrow, October 6, 2017.